So you can move to the section on Nair marriage, I think. All of this was covered. Yeah. Let's wait for a few minutes before we begin.
Okay, ma'am. Sure.
All right. So Chanel, could we go back to the PPT, please? So we were discussing Nair marriage and Nair matrilineal society. So the Nairs in Kerala, again, their matrilineal society that is defined both in terms of, excuse me, descent as well as residence. Now, residence, as you know, as I think we've already discussed, because of the problem that this situation of property inheritance through the female line and authority remaining with the men, it created a context where women, where men and women then lived in their own natal households. So both husbands and wives basically stayed where they were. So residence in an Nair system is nato local, and it meant that they had to remain in their own property group. The brothers in order to manage the property, and the sisters in order to continue the matrilineal. Now, each property group would have matrilineally related kin, and so therefore husbands and wives then did not live together. The property groups were headed by the eldest member of the family of the group, and this eldest member is called the Karnavaram. And within this system, then it is the mother's brother who holds clear authority over the property group and over all the people within that property group. So, and this means that the mother's brother then had control over the sister's children. So the man had control over his sister's children. Informally, older women would have authority over the younger women and younger people in the family. But overall, all of them were under the control of the Karnavaram, right? Now, what is interesting in the matrilineal system, and it's interesting and also different, is, and of course, then that leads to the emergence of certain circumstances and in the relations and the ideas of relatedness. So in the matrilineal systems, it is the men who have the most authority over the men who have the most authority over a woman are not the ones who have legitimate sexual access to the woman. So in this case, because it is the brother who has a control, who has authority over the women, but the brother has no sexual relations, no sexual access to the woman. So the men who have sexual access versus the men who have authority are two separate groups of men. In patrilineal systems, these two groups of men are the same. The men who have control are the ones, well, not always, because you can also think of the control of the patriarch within the family. So one would think that women in in matrilineal societies, have more independence and feel that they're more independent, as the men were not their sexual partners. But this was often not experienced. As I pointed out before, often, in a study, Nair women said that in fact it would probably be easier. It's probably easier to talk to and persuade husbands and rather than persuade the men who you did not have sexual relations with. So there's always a kind of distance, and that distance creates a kind of impossibility of speaking with them. Um, so, so the matrilineal system, as we see, and the kind of marriage on which it is based, which is, we've discussed this, which is marriage is a very slender tie, and the because of the relations between the woman and the men in the family are not connected to any sexual ties. There is a kind of, there definitely is a kind of openness and independence that women may have. And secondly, because the men that women have sexual ties with do not live in the same household, those men then don't have the same kind of control and authority over these women, and therefore that also leads to a certain kind of independence and of freedom in those relations of sexuality, of those relations which have implications for sexual unions. So, so if you think of this in terms of how it impacts the next generation, again, there is little sort of enduring, there are no sort of enduring ties between husband and wife. Again, from the idea of the Sambandham, we know that several such ties may be possible. However, we do not, they cannot be seen as sanctioned casual sex or promiscuity. And in terms of the children, then we saw that it meant that the bonds between mother and child were very close. The bond between brother and sisters is very close, and but the bond between husband and wife is again not is close, but it's not primary. And the husband-wife bond is not allowed to develop in a way that it will threaten the brother-sister bond. So it will not brother-sister bond or matrilineal solidarity. So, and therefore marriage is organized in a way that it does not threaten matrilineal solidarity. Fertility in this system, like in the patrilineal system, is crucial, but women have control over their own sexuality. So in the patrilineal system, we saw that sexuality, marriage, kinship, and control over these over sexuality and marriage are central to how the kinship system plays out. In matrilineal systems, sexuality is not sort of controlled in the same way. The sexuality of women is not controlled in the same way. Partly this has to do with the fact that those who have sexual access to the women then don't have other kinds of control over them, because they're not living in the same household. They don't have access to the property and so on. So but in terms of notions of honor and honor of the matrilineal group, again, there were similar considerations of transgressions of caste and so on, as we find in the patrilineal systems. So this is so far as, I mean, we don't want to go into too much of the detail, but we know that also most of these societies, and we talked about this a little bit, most of these societies have undergone change. And, so when you think of Nair marriage now in contemporary society, there is more of a shift to, to the sort of patriarchal of the patrilineal form. So this whole idea of the two kinds of marriages, tali tying and sambandham, don't really exist. The whole idea of sort of monogamy and monogamous marriages and modern monogamy has sort of entered the system, and therefore there have been changes in the matrilineal system. So yeah. So generally, then so here what we are seeing then is the linkage between, which is what we originally began with, the linkage between these three institutions: marriage, family, and kinship. And we can see how this linkage is different for patrilineal society and different for matrilineal society. We've discussed women's roles in both these systems, and we see how women's roles again in these three institutions are very different, and how they impact solidarity within the system. Quite a big part of this is shaped by how women's sexuality is viewed, how it is conceived, and how it is controlled. Now, just a couple of things which you see here on this particular slide, which is to sort of think a little bit more on the institution of marriage, where and this again we have talked of before, that marriage is a linking between two social groups. So you can't see it simply in terms of the coming together of two individuals, but it is the coming together of two groups. When we discussed Levi-Strauss, we said, what happens because of the incest taboo is that you create these two groups, which are the groups of wife givers and wife takers. And marriage is about linking these two groups. It is in most cultures, it is accompanied by religious rituals, public festivities, and the exchange of goods and services. Again, remember we had this discussion on how marriage is a context, and Ellen Levi-Strauss uses this, where it is an institution where the exchange of goods, services, and women take place. And some of the sort of common practices around marriage are bride price and dowry. And again, we see the kind of difference in different systems where this is used. The bride price is the recognition of the acknowledgement of a family's productive and reproductive capabilities, so that when you take a woman from a family, you have to replace, is somewhat at least replace the productive and reproductive value that the bride provided in the natal family. So here, what you see is that there is a transfer of resource that is happening, and therefore, that transfer of resources that is happening because the bride is moving to the groom's family. So an exchange needs to happen, which means the groom's family needs to pay something to the bride's family. Now, over a period of time, you have the system where a system of dowry, which is considered largely a gift to the bride or to the couple by the girl's parents for setting up this new conjugal estate. And we know the way in which dowry has morphed into becoming something completely different. Next slide, please. So, so one shift along with this kind of changes in society, the fact that with sort of and the sort of more dominant form of patrilineal patriarchal societies taking shape, many communities that traditionally gave bride price now have now sort of bought into the practice of dowry. Now, so if one thinks then of, so one way of sort of looking at dowry has been this notion of pre-mortem inheritance, which means inheritance before death, because you generally inherit your parents' property on their death. But this is like, you get a part of their property before death. So in fact, there is a line of argument that suggests that this is a way of ensuring that women get a share of the estate. And there are several problems with, of course, there are several problems with this kind of argument, because the primarily because I think the bride rarely has control over the dowry. The dowry is paid in very different ways. If you think of dowry that is paid in cash, it is never paid to the bride herself, right? It is paid to the family. The in terms of jewelry and other things, again, it's the women who kind of sort of gain control, women in the family who gain control of that. So A, because of the lack of control of the women who receive this dowry, and B, because it never represents a fixed share of a particular divisible estate. So to think of this in terms of a pre-mortem inheritance is actually problematic. Now, what the dowry has done then is that you see that it has led to the inflation of marriage expenses. So it's not simply to think about a rejection of dowry, but it is also to think about the kind of things this has led to. So this whole idea of sort of extravagant, large weddings has sort of taken root. Destination weddings, all of that is in fact part of the changes in society or the changes in this institutions of marriage, family, and kinship, and the inflation of marriage expenses is definitely connected to dowry, and so this leads to a situation where then brides become brides become controlled. They have no say in these institutions, in the institution of marriage, in the institution of family, the family that they're moving into, and so on. Yeah, this next, please. Yeah. So, okay, do you have any questions at this point? Okay, let's move to talking about the family. Now, before I do that, we can channel. If you can play the video, have you received it?
Yes, ma'am, I'll just play it.
Yeah, so let's watch a very short video which defines for us what a family is, and we can talk about that a little bit.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. My name is Zach Walls. I'm a sixth-generation Iowan and an engineering student at the University of Iowa, and I was raised by two women. My biological mom, Terry, told her grandparents that she was pregnant, that the artificial insemination had worked, and they wouldn't even acknowledge it. It actually wasn't until I was born and they succumbed to my infantile cuteness that they broke down and told her that they were thrilled to have another grandson. Unfortunately, neither of them lived to see her marry her partner, Jackie, of 15 years when they wed in 2009. My younger sister and only sibling was born in 1994. We actually have the same anonymous donor, so we're full siblings, which is really cool for me. And I guess the point is that our family really isn't so different from any other Iowa family. When I'm home, we go to church together, we eat dinner, we go on vacations. But we have our hard times too, we get in fights. Actually, my mom, Terry, was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 2000. It is a devastating disease that put her in a wheelchair, so we've had our struggles. But, we're Iowans. We don't expect anyone to solve our problems for us. We'll fight our own battles. We just hope for equal and fair treatment from our government. Being a student at the University of Iowa, the topic of same-sex marriage comes up quite frequently in classroom discussions. And the question always comes down to, well, can gays even raise kids? And the question, the conversation gets quiet for a moment because most people don't really have an answer. And then I raise my hand and say, actually, I was raised by a gay couple and I'm doing pretty well. I scored in the 99th percentile on the ACT. I'm actually an Eagle Scout. I own and operate my own small business. If I was your son, Mr. Chairman, I believe I'd make you very proud. I'm not really so different from any of your children. My family really isn't so different from yours. After all, your family doesn't derive its sense of worth from being told by the state, you're married, congratulations. No, the sense of family comes from the commitment we make to each other, to work through the hard times so we can enjoy the good ones. It comes from the love that binds us. That's what makes a family. So what you're voting here isn't to change us. It's not to change our families, it's to change how the law views us, how the law treats us. You are voting for the first time in the history of our state to codify discrimination into our Constitution, a Constitution that, but for the proposed amendment, is the least amended Constitution in the United States of America. You are telling Iowans that some among you are second-class citizens who do not have the right to marry the person you love. So will this vote affect my family? Would it affect yours? Over the next 2 hours, I'm sure we're going to hear plenty of testimony about how damaging having gay parents is on kids. But in my 19 years, not once have I ever been confronted by an individual who realized independently that I was raised by a gay couple. And you know why? Because the sexual orientation of my parents has had zero effect on the content of my character. Thank you very much.
Okay, so any comments? What do you think? What are the what's the discussion on family that we see here?
Family is a order in which the members help each other, and it doesn't really matter if it is an ideal kind of family that we think or not.
So what is the ideal family? Do we have an idea of what the ideal family is? Others, it's not just Kuldeep's, responsibility to respond. Yeah, go ahead.
Like it's not ideal. The word should be a typical, I guess. It would be better because what we think of a typical family is a father, a mother, a male father, a male, female mother, and kids. This is
Yeah.
what a typical family. But in this, it was not a typical family, but an ideal family because there was love and everything. Role was taken by both the parents nicely. So it was ideal, but not the typical.
Yeah, okay, that I think that's a great distinction you make, very interesting. The distinction between what is a typical family and what is an ideal family. And a typical family is about a heterosexual couple with kids. So when we think of what constitutes a family, then we think of this heterosexual couple with their children. Now, if I ask you then what constitutes a family in the Indian context, will your answer still remain the same?
Ma'am, in the Indian context, a family is more extended one. Not only your closest, that is father and mother and brother, sister. It is also the extended family that includes sometimes grandparents, even grandparents, brothers, etc. So in Indian context, it is more about an extended family rather than a small circle around you.
Okay, that's a good point. Now, can I say just to think about your own families and how many of you do you think you have this typical family where you have a heterosexual couple with their children, and how many of you have a different form? Do all of us here, how many of us are here? I mean, maybe there are 29 of us. Maybe, so if you can think about how many of us here do we think we have typical families? Or how many of us do we think we have families that are different? Zero percent, says Kuldeep. We don't have different families. So there's nobody here who lives in a joint family?
Okay, ma'am. If it was about joint family, then I am myself.
No, I'm saying anything other than the typical, which is heterosexual, not, it doesn't necessarily have to be, I mean, I wasn't necessarily talking about. So I said in the Indian context, when you think of the family, there's, the idea of the family, if I think of the idea of the family as a nuclear family, which is two adults living together with their children, which is what you, Vaishnavi said is the, is the typical family constituted like that. But are there other forms? So, do we have like, a joint family? Do we have an extended family?
Yes, ma'am. I am in extended family.
Ma'am, I have a question myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the families which adopt a child,
Yeah.
would those be considered a typical family? Because often when a child is adopted, certain notions come attached with the child. Like it's not usually the child is not as welcomed or accepted due to certain reasons that which relate to it being not the child not being the carrying the lineage, and it's not carrying the purity of blood of the family and such notions. So would that be considered a typical family, or would we also think that the whole it's a different kind of family?
Yeah, I think it would be a different kind of family because, again, the conventional idea of the family is about a heterosexual couple producing and raising children together within the same household, right? That's the conventional idea of the family. Anything that deviates from this would involve an understanding of a different kind of family. And the two concepts that I have put up there. So we first have this concept of a nuclear family, which, as we were discussing earlier and Vaishnavi pointed out, is a typical family, and where the idea is that it's two heterosexual adults living together and raising their own biologically produced children. But when I say a nuclear family, it could also mean a gay couple raising their children within the same household. It could mean a heterosexual couple raising their adopted children living within the same household. These are all definitionally, these are all nuclear families.
Ma'am, we lost your voice.
Other than the married couple live within the same household. So, it may be a brother who lives in the same household, a brother or a sister. A joint family is where there will be more than one married couple and their children living in the same household. So now in India, what we have is, I mean, the reason I was trying to ask you the question of how is it different, how are your families different, is that For instance, when I think about my family, even though mine was a nuclear family, there was largely a principle of jointness with which we operated. So my father would not be comfortable doing or taking any decisions without asking his eldest brother. So he saw his eldest brother as sort of like the head of the household, and so the principle of jointness was very important in our family. So even though we may have lived in separate households, owing to sort of jobs and opportunities, etc., the sense of jointness, the sense that we were a joint family, that was very, very important. But when we think of the joint family, definitionally, it's when more than one married couple live together within the same household. So if my father and my uncle were to live in the same household, that would be a joint family. But in this case, what we see is that there is in many Indian families there is a ideology of jointness which brings the family together, and I think this is something that many of you may have experienced. It's also then connected to how we see the relationship between family and kinship. When you have the ideology of jointness, it also means that notions of notions of honor, notions of notions of sort of the ideas of what must happen within the family are connected not to those people who live within the household, but to those who are even outside that household. So when there is an ideology of jointness, it's not simply about what the 4 people or the 5 people within the family decide. It has implications beyond that. And yeah, so let's just think about then what the sort of functions of the family are. So when we look at the family from a next slide, please. Look at the family from a functionalist perspective. What do we see? And that little video you saw actually describes the functions pretty well. The first, I think, is in terms of biological reproduction, because the family is the legitimate site for biological reproduction. And human fertility is both determined by and it impacts the family values and structure. So how this biological reproduction is organized is determined by the values of the family, and it also shapes the structure of the family, right? So this now when we think of this context of biological reproduction and the family's control over this function, we know that the family is not alone in controlling this function, right? Because there are larger norms in place, and there are shifts in those norms. So my grandmother had 6 children, right? My mother had 2, right? And I have 1. So you see that there has been a shift in how we conceive in our family, how we have conceived of reproduction, and how we have conceived of the ideas of the structure of the family, and how human fertility is to be used to think about framing the structure of the family. The second function of the family is the regulation of sexuality. So the family is the institution that regulates sexuality, and it enables the ideological connection between procreation and sexuality. So it links sexuality to the function of reproduction. Now, so in some senses, if you think about the control of sexuality, it is tied to this whole idea of procreation, that ultimately the use of sexuality is in reproduction, is in procreation. And so therefore it must be controlled in particular ways. The third is socialization. It's the as we know, the family is the primary agent of socialization. It raises the young. It teaches them how to be within these institutions of family, marriage, and kinship, but also beyond them. So that's the first sort of institution that you are a part of, and you are taught how to be a person, an individual within other institutions, such as, firstly, such as the sort of the immediate realm of kinship and the wider network, the wider sort of extended kin, and then beyond it in the institutions of education, and then beyond it in the spaces of work. A major function of the family is also that of welfare, or the care and nurturance of the young, and not just the young, but also the old, those who are not able fully, and so the unemployed. So it takes care of the family is a site where the care of all people is organized. Um, just give me a second. Sorry. So it's the institution that really sort of cares for the young, cares for the sick, the aged, and so on. And this idea of care is also linked then to the function of biological reproduction, but because it also cares for the pregnant women, and then ensures that the children are cared for, and so on. The family institution of the family is also responsible for these larger economic functions of production, distribution, and consumption. We know that in societies which followed the domestic mode of production, in societies or which continue to follow in some senses the domestic mode of production, where you may be consuming some of the stuff that you produce. In those, and in fact, in certain contexts, in all situations, the family is the site for the sexual division of labor within the household. It makes a distinction between the household and the world outside, and so on. So it is this, largely when you think of the modern family, we think of it in terms of consumption. It's the unit of consumption, because when you think of industrial society, what happened in the industrial society was that we were no longer producing what we needed, right? So in the domestic mode of production, in agricultural society, you consume what you produce, right? Or you produce certain things, you consume a part of it, and part of it you sell. In industrial societies with sort of large-scale production of goods, we know that the family became largely a site of consumption. But the family is also a site for distribution. It is where the resources are actually distributed between members of the family. So whether it's food, whether it's financial resources, there is the allocation of that happens in the family. Um, so this is in terms of what the sort of functions when we look at the family from a function. The family and family life. We know that a lot of this contemporary theorizing discusses the drastic changes that have taken place in families with the advent of industrialization and industrial and urban society. And so one of the big changes is that the emergence of the nuclear family and the nuclear family as being free, relatively free from the obligations of larger kinship networks. Now, even as I say this, we know that, again, in several contexts, in fact, we are not free from the obligations of larger kinship networks. When we study, in the tutorial, when we read the essay on mass synthesis and then go on to discuss honor crimes and honor killings, we will see that the larger kinship networks actually continue to have a hold on individual life paths, the way in which families make decisions and so on, nuclear families make decisions. So, but overall, there have been certain changes in family. The fact that most of us can now say that we actually live in nuclear families, and the fact that there is some amount of detraditionalization and individualization of social life, which has taken place. Now, now, one of the sort of effects of this detraditionalization or individualization leads to this sort of concern, the concern over the breakdown of the traditional family, the concern that there is a disintegration of the moral frameworks. And so what has happened is, if one looks at the negative aspects or the negative fallout of this industrialization, then one of the negative fallouts is this idea of the breakdown. If I think of it in terms of a positive impact, the positive impact really has been the democratization of personal relationships, and we can see this very simply, for instance, in the way in which our parents respond to their parents and the way in which we respond to our parents. So if you just think generationally, what have been the shifts in conceiving of parent-child relationships? If you ask your mother how she related to her parents and think about how you relate to yours, I think you will find that there definitely have been shifts, and largely there has been more of a democratization of personal relationships. Now, when we think of when we conceive of the family in terms of a functionalist view, we can see that the idea of this contained nuclear family evolved as a response to the needs of modern industrial urban society, and family was seen as the institution which could sort of ensure a certain kind of social cohesion, which could ensure civilization, which could ensure the continuance of a certain culture and the values of that culture, and ensure social order. So in a sense, it embodied, the family is the institution that embodied the moral health of the community. So you think about the sort of the significance of the family, because it's the family that is then responsible not just for ensuring order or making sure that the young are taken care of. But the young are taken care of in a way that this moral health of society is actually ensured. So, so now, now when you think of this, so this is the kind of a view of the sociological view of the family that we have. Now there is a shift in this view around the 70s and the 80s, and largely this shift is connected to the feminist movement, connected to the ideas in the feminist movement, the ideas of looking at the family from the perspective or using the categories of patriarchy and patriarchal dominance and so on. And this sociological view then looks at the family as an institution that has largely been romanticized. So again, this is a critique to the functionalist view of family. So this view then, the feminist view and the critical view then looks at, says that the family has largely been romanticized. It has been seen as a secure and a supportive network, and this kind of uncritical sort of version of the family is challenged through the feminist movement, and which rejected the notion that families and the way in which we know families have and the structure of families are in any way natural, and inevitable or even necessary. So, so this view of the family then thinks of it in terms of, or articulates that it is the family. All the family has done is, in fact, reproduced patriarchy and capitalism. So here we see that there is a connection. When we think of the family, we think of it really in terms of how we saw it in that video that I showed you, where it's really about the connection that you feel with the other people that you are with, the connections that emerge most often from biology, but also from feelings of love and attachment and so on. But when I think of the feminist understanding of family, then we see that it focuses on this kind of showing the connection between family, patriarchy, and capitalism, and saying that all the family has done is actually reproduced the patriarchal system, has reproduced the capitalist system, and so on. Now, so then, as an extension to this, you see that the family has, by exploiting women as labor, as a source of unpaid labor within the home, has in fact sought to, has in fact ensured the maintenance of capitalism. In addition to this, we also see that this the family has been responsible for maintaining the difference between the public and the private, because it's the family which is the private, it's the private space, it's your own space, it's the space that you retreat to when you don't want the public space anymore, right? But this retaining this duality and maintaining this duality has also supported the division of the sexual division of labor, right? Has also supported the fact that when you think of the nurturance and care, it gets connected to the biological function, it gets connected to who is best suited, right? Who is best suited to care for the child, right? And in this case, it becomes the mother is best suited, because it is the mother who bears the child. It is the mother who breastfeeds the child. And so that sort of biological fact becomes, is placed at the center of how how labor is going to be organized, not just within the family, but also outside. Um, so this kind of feminist understanding then challenges the idea of the family as a site of harmonious, well-adapted social interactions, and says that the family, because of this kind of harmony, in fact has the capacity to hide a lot of cruelty, oppression, and injustice. And and this too is linked to the sharp duality between private and public, which the family holds up. Because of this duality of private and public, it's possible for the family to hide all of this. That, you know, because the family is a private space, nobody wants to intrude into that space, and so therefore it becomes possible for a lot of violence, for a lot of for patriarchal dominance and all of this kind of control to continue within the family. So now these, if you think then of the shifts and you know, what kinds of things were happening, you know, the ideas of the context of rising rates of divorce, cohabitation and birth outside of marriage. These were kinds, you know, same-sex relations, and the sort of the movement towards recognition of these relations, and the shifts in terms of the use of reproductive technology to then shape what families are like, to shape the structure of families. All of these contexts become significant in critically understanding what is happening with the family as a social institution. So so you see that that sociologically then research on the family is not simply about no longer simply about how the families maintain order and what the functions are, but really a sort of more radical and critical understanding of the family. And so, you know, you have this book written by a feminist sociologist. The name of the book is Families We Choose, right? Now, so fundamentally, what we are saying is that, you know, it's not simply about birth and the one you're born into and about your biological connections, but there are all these different directions in which we can think of the family. So it's possible then to, when we sociologically, when we think of the family, to reframe it as something you do rather than seeing it as something you are. So so responses of when we think of family members and their responses to each other, we have to think of them as being negotiated, contingent, and not simply as being normatively defined. So if I take a functionalist view and if I think of the typical and the ideal family, then I think that a lot of this comes from what is not, how is it normatively defined. But when we think of the shifts in the family, we can see that negotiatedness, the contingent aspect, really has shaped what the family is. And you have sort of the significance then of same-sex relations, the significance of close friendships, the significance of alternate ways in which the family is being reimagined, the idea also of children's agency, the recognition of children's agency within the family. All of this then becomes important in how we conceive of the family, how we conceive of the intensely private space of the family. Now, in the Indian context, I think what has happened is that a lot of the early studies of the family in India was done by colonial scholars, and they tended to then focus a lot more on the sort of the traditional notions of family without possibly looking at, again, differences. But largely it has been conceived in term, and also so one is that it's based on colonial studies, but also based on a textual understanding. This textual understanding is largely predominantly an upper caste Hindu understanding. So again, here you have a kind of bias because you have not explored different kinds of families in different kinds of societies. So this the idea of the Hindu joint family as a property holding unit becomes significant. And so there is a kind of importance and significance that is given to this idea of the Hindu joint family. And we try to then see how this idea of jointness and the family and the solidarities that are present in the family sort of have continued in some kind of unchanging way. I think that's about it. Okay. So, yeah. So, now sociologically, one important aspect of the family in India is this distinction between the family and the household. So again, now this is important because when you think of the family in different contexts, in different spaces, it's you realize that it's not simply about the family, but also about the household. So the household is the co-resident group, who are the people who reside within the same space. So, so one is to have kinship ties, but the other is that within the household, again, through notions of jointness, through changes, we will see that the household can be, again, a very different kind of space. And so a distinction is made with regard to the family in India between the family and the household. The next slide, please. So, so when we think of then the significance of the household, we can, in the context of India, we can think of the household as becoming the site of production, distribution, and consumption, as the site where women's economic, socioeconomic status can be measured. In terms of the contribution to the workforce and the economy, the household becomes more significant than the family itself, and the idea of the household also shapes the notions of decision making, the notions of ownership and management of property, and so on. So in certain contexts, then we have to look at it not simply in terms of the idea of the family, but in the idea of the family in terms of nuclear and so on, but in terms of who all are living within a particular property unit. And how does that, and I think when you think of the matrilineal society in this context, that helps you, because you hear what you need to think. So who's the family in the matrilineal society? Is it the husband, wife, and the children, or is it the household, right? So one sort of concluding idea is the idea of this jointness, the ideology of jointness that continues to, in some form or the other, dominate the idea of the family in India. Second, that largely the ideology is of patrilineal sort of succession and inheritance, and lineal relations are privileged over conjugal relations. So it's really about that patriline, the relations in the patriline that are more important than the conjugal relations. And a little bit of this, I think, we discussed with regard when we talked about Punjabi kinship, but we spoke of it also in terms of, how the conjugal relations actually sometimes may be masked in order to give that kind of priority to the lineal relations. So this, if you think of the joint family and you think of this idea that the joint family is disintegrating, I think a good point to counter that idea of disintegration is that the ideology of jointness remains. So in terms of looking at the joint family, we know that it is no longer the statistically predominant form. So that's why it would be, maybe we could have done a poll to think about how many of us live in joint families and how many of us live in nuclear families. But if I think of the, so that statistically it is no longer the predominant form. The average size, average size of the household may be increasing, and individuals at different points may live in different types of households. Right? So there is a great deal of variety, and this variety then again is, when we think of this variety, it's useful to think in terms of household rather than simply in terms of nuclear family. But even though statistically it may not be the predominant form, the ideology of jointness I think continues in some form or the other, and this is an important aspect of the kinship system in the Indian context. Okay. So this is something I think that we need to discuss in the context of Punjabi kinship, that when we think in the context of that Punjabi kinship essay that I said we will discuss more sort of closely in the tutorial. But when we think of the joint family and the ideology of the joint family, we know that there are certain cultural codes, and when I say cultural code, honor is a part of this, is a central part of this cultural code, which means that as a family, it's important to maintain the honor of the family, the name of the family, and the honor of the larger joint family. So you cannot, if you think of processes of detraditionalization, processes of individualization, those have not taken shape in a way that you can now decide to completely ignore the principles of jointness, to completely ignore the extended family and what this extended family thinks of decisions taken at an individual level. Now, where is the expression of this cultural code of honor most visible? It is most visible in and through the institution of marriage. Now, why is this so? It is so because it is the institution of marriage that provides the structural link between caste and kinship. So what is it that helps a unit to maintain its caste group, right? It is marrying with, it is endogamy, right? So how do you perpetuate a caste group? You perpetuate a caste group through the practice of endogamy, right? If there was, a lot of intermarrying across caste groups, a lot of intermarrying between the so-called upper caste and the so-called lower caste, then the institutions of marriage, family, and kinship would be very, very different. We could break this structural link between caste and kinship. So it is so this honor and the code of honor is actually being maintained through marriage. marriage is what, and the code of honor is connected to not just honor of the family, but honor of the family in remaining within a certain caste identity. So here we see how the institutions of caste, marriage, and kinship are actually connected to each other. And at the center of this cultural codes of honor is the regulation of female sexuality. Because if you do not regulate female sexuality, then female sexuality can be given away for procreation outside of the caste group, right? So then, I mean, again, when we say it, it sounds bizarre, but this is the way in which the cultural code of honor and its connection to caste is actually is being maintained. So now these cultural codes have been challenged in several ways because, as I said before, there is a democratization of relationships. You know, there are new ideas of relatedness which have come forward, but yet when codes are challenged, they are seen as infringements, and infringements then mean that you have to reinstate culture, honor, and so on. And when you reinstate, you try to reinstate through, you know, through sort of standard practices, let's say, of, you know, social control measures. When social control measures like maybe ostracizing somebody, denying them certain things, when these don't work, then ultimately they're enforced through the use of violence. So, and again, this is something we will take on in more detail in the tutorial. But in the ultimate analysis, what happens is that you know, the threat of violence or actual violence is used in order to control female sexuality, right? So that in order to signal or to communicate that women do not have the right to give right to their own bodies, do not have the right to give away their sexuality to whoever they please. It must be given away within the frame of these cultural codes, within the frames of maintaining marriage, family, and kinship. Yeah. So if one thinks of it in this way, then family becomes the site of ideological reproduction and the subjection of women. You know, women are seen as the custodians of tradition, of caste, of community, and so on. And therefore, if when women fail to appropriately take care, to be appropriate custodians of these aspects, then they must be reminded of their place in the system. So, so all these aspects, the aspect of fraternal solidarity, remember I said that more important than the conjugal bond is the patriline. So all these aspects of fraternal solidarity, affection, parental affection and love, and unconditional love, all of these prevail over the conjugal bond. So the conjugal bond is actually not that important. What is more important are these notions of sacrifice, honor, and so on. Yeah. So in this, then you see that the brother is conceived of as a trustee of the sister's welfare, and his responsibility towards the sister is supposed to continue even after marriage. And now again, here I think this, if I think of this in terms of how the brother becomes a person who is important in maintaining the notions of honor, of the notions of tradition and community, and also as someone who ensures that women continue to remain as custodians of tradition and community. So it's not simply about being a trustee of the sisters' welfare, it's being a trustee of the sisters' welfare in order to, again, reproduce the family as a site of this kind of ideological, in order to maintain those that ideology of honor and so on. Yeah. So the other next slide, please. Is this the end or yeah? Okay. So can we go back? Yeah, I think I'll stop here because it's probably too heavy. We want to, in the next class, we'll begin with, I want to show a couple of videos, and we'll begin with this, this idea of what are the sort of new changes that have happened. I think one of the, as you see there, one of the new changes is this whole idea of, love marriages and the idea of an openness within marriage and kinship and family, and how that has changed these institutions to a certain extent. So we look at this along with the idea of violence and honor, and how violence is used to ultimately to maintain honor, and we will also think about sort of reproductive technologies and the use of reproductive technologies and how that has affected the structure of families. Do you have any questions?